Okay, we are live. Okay, so that's the first agenda item done. I don't see any new faces, which brings us to status updates. Um, there have been a couple of pull requests merged to add support for build packs API 08. I think the only piece of functionality remaining is the change from positional arguments to environment variables. That's just pending on me fixing the tests there, but all the other features, including the new working directory changes, were merged. So hoping to cut a release today if I can get to that pull request and if someone can review it. And that's pretty much it.
If someone's interested in backporting those or forward porting those to the 2.0 branch, that needs to happen too.
Yep. I think there were also, I don't know, Daniel, if you want to put something on the agenda for the other discussions we were having around the logging stuff. Like regardless of your PR, there was another issue where we were talking about standardizing on the log interface.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, that's pretty much it in terms of status updates, unless anyone has anything else I want to talk about. Cool. Moving on to open RFCs. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
I think in terms of open RFCs, I know that Mikey made some progress on this well-packed layers read-only stuff. Do you want to give an update on that?
Yeah, sure. Just tried a couple ideas for detecting if a build pack is, basically which build packs are changing which layers. Ended up having some good success. For a small amount of overhead, we could watch the file system using a FS Notify library, which is cross-platform, and it's like an event-based asynchronous file system monitor. So I did a little proof of concept in that experiment branch there. And yeah, it added like about a half a second to a 12-second build with just one experiment that I ran. So it was not a lot of overhead there. And certainly I didn't put any effort into like optimizing it or anything. So could find little tweaks to make it a little better. But yeah, so detection does seem, detection of like a build pack, changing a different build packs layer certainly seems feasible. And that was basically, I was just doing that to clear out an item in the lifecycle backlog, but that's just some input for the broader discussion about, okay, do we want to detect and warn? Do we want to like actively prevent build packs from writing other ones? And then do we want to, let build packs allow their layers to be shared with other build packs? Or, there's a whole broader discussion that I haven't been involved in and don't really have strong opinions about, but I know others do. So just adding this as a data point.
I was curious about the watch stuff. I think in the past when I've tried this, if there are too many files that you're watching, there's some sort of a limit, I think, on the kernel on the number of files you can watch. I don't know if you tried with like what kind of like how many files this project had that you were watching, or if you noticed any issues with that.
I never hit any errors about too many open file descriptors or anything like that. It doesn't watch every file, it watches every directory. So it'll tell you if a file's edited within a directory. So that's I believe that's the case, at least. Maybe that's something worth double checking. But I did see like a recursive watcher that was just watching directories, and I'm pretty sure I saw that in documentation that it would catch any file edits in that directory. It's a Java-based app, I believe, so it had a JRE in there and things like that. So it wasn't like a total, sure, it's a sample app, but it's got a little bit of heft to it, at least, and using the legit Paketo build packs and the Spring REST app. So it's got all the Java in there, so it's not terribly small.
Cool. And apart from this, was there any changes in terms of CPU activity? Like, was the amount of apart from just the additional time taken, was the CPU usage more, or like?
I didn't measure that in my experiments, but I could add some CPU monitoring or any other metrics. It should be pretty straightforward to add in.
Yeah, this looks promising, though. I think one of the reasons why, I think when we were discussing this, the main issue with giving a warning was that it was going to be expensive to detect changes, but I think this looks very promising.
Yeah, the first one I did, the first attempt I did was just to basically hash the layers directories after each build pack runs. That was way expensive. That doubled the build time. That was not a good idea. But this one was much better. So yeah, there's certainly ways to do it that are not that do impact performance much worse.
Sorry, so just so I understand that the name of this RC is make build layers read only, but is that opinion not maybe official, right? That there's still kind of some discussion
just not
about whether or not
enforced,
to
Johnny.
just make it detectable first, right? And then what to do after that is still TBD.
I think it's always been the intention that build packs can't modify each other's layers, but the lifecycle has never enforced it. So this would be about enforcing what's in the spec.
Got it. So a warning wouldn't be a strict enforcement, but it would be a warning. I guess I'm just, the name of the ticket seems to indicate more than a warning.
Yeah, the original RFC actually goes into detail about making this enforceable. There were a couple of things. One was we want to enforce this. So the idea was that as soon as a build pack is done writing its layers, we would actually zip them up ready for export parallelly while the other build process is happening. But there are build packs that may make changes to that layer after it was zipped up and ready for export, which right now just works fine. You can make changes after the build pack is done writing its layers, and they would still be exported out. So I think this part about detecting whether changes were made were for two reasons. One, maybe we don't want to zip those things up. Maybe we just want to throw a warning. And even if we do zip things up, we should let build pack authors know that there is some build pack in their group that's modifying previous layers, and those changes may not be persisted towards the export process. So either way, we needed some way to watch whether files have changed after things have been exported. The current RFC was just do this, don't give any warnings out, because it was going to be expensive. So there was this blocker to figure out if we can actually give out warnings and let build pack authors know that something is happening that they didn't expect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Have we looked at like preventing read writes, or I'm sorry, writes with like file system level permissions or something like that? Like if you chmod the whole thing after the build pack's done.
Yeah, I think there was also something there around that, along those lines, but it was almost the same. Like to go to each and every file, mark it as read only, preserve that information somewhere, and then during the export process, restore that, like those set of permissions, and then export it out. And there were like some other issues, like in general, how do you want to, like, do you just want to prevent like the strip out the write bits, or do you also want to strip out any other like permission that's there? Like if you, for example, take out the execute bits from files or directories, maybe like you don't want new files to be added to the directory or something like that. So the permission, I think like we could also do that route. It was just like we were essentially modifying what the build pack intended to write out without like knowing what the intention was in
Yeah.
each every corner case, and then trying to restore it.
What about, I mean, would it be possible to run build packs as different users? I mean, that would
That
make it
was
enforceable as well.
That was one of the early proposals in this RFC as well. Like each build pack starts off with a random user ID, and I think there was some opposition to that.
Yeah.
Like, because like I think the life cycle would have had to switch between each build pack a user, and I think that required some more permissions than it currently does. I think like lifecycle takes root initially and then just drops it at some point.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, half second's not a lot, but it is perceptible, so it does make me worry a little.
Yeah. I mean, this is also disregarding the fact that we'll also have to zip these things up if you want to enforce it rather than just one. So like that will probably incur some CPU overhead, if not time overhead. Because like there were some ideas that we could do it parallelly, and before the exporter is ready, we could have already zipped up the layers and potentially made the entire build process faster, because now you don't have to wait for all the way till the export process to zip up and calculate the checksums and everything.
Yeah, that would be nice if it offset it.
I think problems there are like, if you want to make it faster, you need to be doing it parallelly, but then you have race conditions. Like you have not guaranteed that anyone's not modified it. And in order to avoid the race conditions, now you're not saving time. And then because you're interleaving the exporting with the building, I feel like there's more cases where you're wasting time. It's like if the build fails, it wasn't worth having done all that exporting.
Yeah. Yeah, this RFC was like from a while ago, but I think one of the reasons I wrote this was because I was frustrated trying to debug which build pack was modifying which of the other build packs layers. And yeah.
And that's, I mean, again, maybe being a little naive, that's never, or the spec specifically kind of forbids that, right?
Yeah.
So,
But like there are times when you're running executables where the intention was to just like never modify the original file system. To give you an example, like if you run the Python interpreter, like you're just running the interpreter, there was no intention to modify the file system. But as a consequence of that, if there are like system libraries present, it will try to create cache versions of them in the same place that the original files were. So like your intention was just to run the Python interpreter, not to write anything to the original file system, but like because of side effects, now you've ended up changing the layer. And then because of that, you're now changing like the the checksum that's being pushed to the registry, which means your bills are not reproducible. You have to push out new data to the registry each time, even though like nothing of value was actually changed. Like these cash files should not have existed anyways. So yeah, things like that.
Could this potentially be gated behind, like a debug or verbose flag, where like by default it would just ignore any changes to those other layers, but then if you needed to troubleshoot, you could run this and it would then be like, oh yeah, something wrote to that.
Potentially. So like this current RFC doesn't like it's not at all written in the sense that we should just throw out a warning. It's written with the idea that I previously described, that we should be exporting the layers as soon as the build pack is done writing it.
I think whether we're exporting as soon as build pack is done writing, or whether we're being very strict and failing if there's any modifications, I prefer a strict version of it, because build packs sort of make assumptions about whether they can reuse a layer or not based on metadata that they wrote for themselves. And if someone else is modifying the layer, then you cannot, be reproducible, or as a build pack know that you're making the right decision.
Yeah. There were also some weird edge cases like shared cache layers. So there was a subsequent RFC alongside this to open up like a feature that was currently just a bug in the lifecycle implementation. So right now, for example, if you have a shared cache layer that you want to restore, so it's not just a temporary directory, but it's a cache layer that you want to restore with each build, and that cache is being used by multiple build packs. The only way of doing that is to create a cache layer and then just like set an env to that layer so that subsequent build packs write back to it. That's a valid use case, but that's not covered in the spec. But the current implementation allows that. And like, we didn't want to break that functionality either. So while enforcing the spec here, there was also a separate RFC, which is this one, to add like shared layers where like you could contribute a layer that could be written by other build packs as well. But like this both of these were like this second one in particular, like it's just back to our caching problem, which is just like got so many flavors of it that we wanted to rethink how we did caching. So that's why this was put on hold. And this other RFC was put on hold because like we wanted someone to do this spike on like whether a warning is feasible or not.
We're at like 20-ish past.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of other topics. I wonder if we want
Yep.
move on.
I think we have a bunch of agenda items for the other RFCs. I see one for the scaffolding one for the dot profile. And then I think we've discussed run image SBOM in detail in the last few working groups. And the others are still drafts. So I don't have anything else I want to talk about, unless anyone has anything they would like to bring up.
I'm good.
Cool.
It's like builder config is
Yeah.
the first topic.
So I just want to describe a problem that we have been facing. I don't know if it will resonate with some of the other build pack authors here, but there are times when we reuse build packs and we want to control some behavior. So like these build packs may be configured by environment variables, for example, or like entries to the build plan, for example. And you want to configure some of this behavior at the builder level rather than leave it to the end user. So like, for example, you want to configure the like npm registry. So like there's a npm install build pack that installs your node modules, but at a builder level, let's say you're in an enterprise and you want to configure the npm registry through an environment variable. Now the lifecycle strips away every environment variable in the build image except for these, which means that if you did want to set something, you would set something in your build image and it will like entirely be ignored, which is not which is not a great way of dealing about things, because the way we fix this is we now have to inject an additional build pack in the beginning that provides these environment variables as overrides for the subsequent build packs. So there's just like a proxy build pack that sits at the beginning, and all it's doing is setting environment variables using the build pack API so that the subsequent build packs respect those environment variables. But the issue with a build pack like that is that it works during build time. So as long as these environment variables are configured and read by other build packs during build, you're good. But if any of these things affect detect, then you can't modify like the behavior of other build packs with like a proxy build pack that's sitting at the beginning. So the only way to inject such environment variables right now is through the platform. So there's a platform end folder where you can inject such environment variables, and it respects that for both detect and build. But that's very limiting, is if as an operator you want to ship a coherent experience where like every user must set these environment variables, and I don't want to rely on my user forgetting to like set these, or like having them pass additional flags to pack, or like mounting additional bindings just to fix like proxies or registries, or like fix their Maven config or settings, for example. So the idea was that there should be a builder level config file, like maybe something like /cnb/builder.toml, which allows the builder to provide the environment variables in a similar way that the lifecycle currently sources it from the platform end directory. So the idea was this file exists in some default location. The platform is allowed to point it to a different location within the build image if it wants to, but by default it looks for /cnb/builder.toml or whatever else you want to call it. And that can describe global environment variables and environment variables that affect a specific build pack. So it's just a toml file that says like, you know how in project.toml we already have a convention of defining environment variables. So something similar to that just describes the environment variables that need to be configured before a build pack's detect or build phase is launched. There were some other conversations I had with, for example, in the Paketo project right now, it sources the location of binaries that it downloads from the build pack toml. So being able to configure just that, like the location of the binaries or which versions you want to include, for example, that would also have been great, but that doesn't necessarily require something at the project level. That's something that's fixable at the Paketo level. But I thought I'd just point out like some other builder related config discussions that have been going on. This one in particular requires a lifecycle change because there's no way right now to make modifications to environment variables in the detect phase, which we need. If it was just the build phase, like we had like a build pack that was already doing this, but we realized that like we also needed something for detect. So that's where the motivation behind this config file comes from.
It sounds like that might hit a need that I have. I've wanted to be able to have like the like major Java version in our build packs configurable at the builder level. So someone could create a builder and say, hey, I want my default to be 17. It seems like this might check that box, which is cool.
Yeah, I think there's a similar need, at least on the Salesforce side too, of looking at using build packs for both like internal use as well as external for customers.
Yeah.
And I mean, the exact use case you described, Sam's, right? It's like, oh, like totally you want to hit internal stuff when you're like hitting npm or something, right? But like you would not hit that when people are deploying to like Heroku, right? And so being able to configure, right now we basically just wrap some of that stuff like as a user, right? Like we basically wrap pack on the internal side for passing in those MBARs. But it definitely would be nice to be able to do that where we have like an internal builder that has some of that config. I mean, we probably wouldn't put like the username and password in, but you could put like default registry location.
Yep. Yeah, so like the idea was not to put any secrets there, but just like public environment variables. So like you can, like it's fine, like some of these package managers, for example, respect config files in home directories. So like that can be solved in some ways, but not every package manager supports like reading a file or something in the home directory. For example, some of them it's easier to configure just using an environment variable. And then apart from package managers, there are also build packs that like read environment variables for their own configuration. So it's just like solving both of those use cases at once while still preserving like the secure environment variable sourcing that Lifecycle currently has. So it's not like we're injecting all the environment variables from the builder into each build pack. But we're choosing which environment variables we want to.
Yeah, even for that config case for like, I know like npm, for instance, has a config file, like you don't want to force a person that like every person who's doing the internal thing to have to write that config file. So you probably would write a build pack that would write that thing that then would take environment variables that would then write it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The other good thing about using environment variables is you can provide overrides or defaults. So like there are cases when you want the builder to override things regardless of what the user specified. And then there are cases where you just want to provide a default in case the user didn't. And then there are also cases like where you want to prepend or append certain values to an environment variable. So like just the general 4 cases we have of changing environment variables, just exposing that to the builder would be great.
Were we talking in working group or something about other builder config as well?
Yeah.
I think like system toml is the first case of builder level config, like you're adding build packs specifically at the builder level that always run regardless of what the user is passing. I feel like we could piggyback on that file, or even, we haven't implemented it yet. So if we don't like the name for all of these use cases, but we think that's like the right, place to make changes, now would be a good time to start that conversation. If we're doing the like append, I was like with you the whole way until like the append prepend default at the builder level, because I feel like if we were going to do that, we'd probably want a different interface that's similar to what we're doing now. And then like when would it run? Like, do you want it to run after the user provided config?
I would assume it would run the exact same way as the platform, where the platform end stuff happens. So like right before platform ends, it should run the builder stuff.
So then you couldn't override the user config, right?
So unless you use so like there are 4 modes of overrides, right? There's like default, override, prepend, append. So like
but the user config is always override. So if it runs before the user config, it can't override the user config, right?
No, but like it's the exact same thing as like the build packs override, right? Like even if the user provides one and the build pack sets a something dot override. It overrides it, although it happens after what the user has provided. But I imagine you could do something similar, right? Like where the builder says
It's
override.
not
No.
actually true because before each build pack runs, the user config gets applied. So even as a build pack, if I override something, the user config wins.
I have not noticed that. Really?
For the environment variable, like if I set foo equal to bar and the user set with override, like bar will not actually override.
Yeah.
Like foo dot override equals bar. If you said that using the end layer thing, the user one wins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
You can
well,
argue about whether that's right or not, but it is true.
because I've noticed that behavior with default. So like if a build pack sets something dot default, then the user one wins. But with overrides, I thought I saw the other behavior. I'll double check.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I was pretty sure this is how it worked because, in a lot of cases, well, we've set up the M stuff for the user in build packs a little bit weirdly, where it's not even always added to the environment. Sometimes it's just provided as files. I think this was like a Salesforce specific need where they didn't want, in all cases, the environment to be in the environment.
Yeah.
I think the way that ends up being consistent, such that it on the file system is the same as it in the environment, is like we only apply it to the environment at the very last minute for that build pack, and it's only if it set something to false, and it always wins. User provided config wins.
Okay. Yeah, I'll check on that, but I think what we want is to override the user behavior if you want to.
Are you gonna write an RFC or something, Sam?
Yeah, I was just gonna like first gather like what kind of use cases folks had. But yeah, I'll probably write one after this. So does this sound like something that would be like useful?
I think so.
I'm not making a principled case for the user provided config always winning, just saying that I believe that it's true. Like the last thing that happens is it applies the platform dir, and that works as an override.
Okay.
I think if it was in a perfect world, I think the user config for me would be the default, but then
yeah,
builder could override it because I can see like an operator level person wanting to squash the user's config.
Yep. I mean, this is new functionality anyway, so we can introduce whatever behavior we want. Like if we think this is the right one, we can just introduce that.
Yeah, it's just nice to piggyback on existing concepts if we can.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a whole separate RFC where we want the user config to always be the default instead of always being an override like it is right now.
I'll double check that.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I think we can move on to the next topic. Which is the scaffolding stuff that Aiden's been working on.
Just, oh yeah, because otherwise my thoughts just fall out of my head. So yeah, a quick kind of update. We're looking at proposing alternative project scaffolding. The reason that we're trying to do this is because we know we've got a problem with onboarding. There is some existing scaffolding, and we want to kind of generalize that to offer scaffolding in Bash, Golang, Rust, a bunch of other things. There's an RFC there. There's some nice discussion on it. And what we wanted to see was a bunch of prototypes to kind of influence the direction that we might go down. And I've got kind of 3.5 prototypes that I kind of want to show you. The first one was what's discussed in there's two pieces of prior art, Springerle and this boiler or bear. The Springerle based prototype, you end up building your template as a single file. It's a text archive file. It looks quite similar to this. So your bash prototype for your build pack would be in this text archive, delimited by the file name and the delimiters. It's pretty straightforward. The implementation is straightforward. It uses only the Go standard library things, so that's quite nice. You can implement it in about, I think this implementation is 50, 60 lines of code. It doesn't do a huge amount. So for example, this only pulls things in from embedded templates right now. And it doesn't prompt end users for any to fill in any variables, nor does it clone from Git. But I kind of felt like that was sufficient to leave it there, just so that you got a flavor of what the actual template format looks like. And we can have a look at some other template formats. We could come up with our own internal template thing in Pack. You might embed templates in Pack as a directory structure. You could have some kind of prompts data file or TOML file, which tells the user to prompt the end user for the package name. You introduce a dependency on some kind of interactive prompt thing. I chose prompt UI, and the implementation is about 300 lines of code to treat the templates as an embedded file system. I've taken the kind of operable chunk and thrown it onto a gist here. The only reason I haven't put all of everything here is because I haven't been organized enough. But you can see that about 300 lines of code. You can create prompts, ask the end user what they want to do, and then actually create the scaffolding based on some embedded file system and write things out, template things and write things out. So that's nice. No yet support yet for Git cloning in this prototype. I'll develop this a bit more to add it. And this is where we would wholly own the scaffolding structure inside Pack. Now we could choose to split the scaffolding structure off from Pack and put it into an external tool. Ideally, we wanted to find an external tool that already existed. I'll have that in the next slide. But the one that kind of directly suits our needs is something that Sambav and I came up with kind of over the past week or so. You can have a look at that if you're interested. But what you can see is a demo of it running here. So you go run the build pack new example. It'll prompt you, do you want a bash example or a Golang example? And then it will successfully create your example depending on what you choose. It's a third-party tool, so we would depend on it. Still need a prompt UI dependency or something like that to ask for the initial language selection. Do you want Bash or Golang or Rust? It means adding about 20 lines of code to Pack itself, but you've got about 500 lines of code in the external dependency. And we also need to be able to pass the Pack logger into it, which I haven't done yet, but that's fairly straightforward. Why did I come up with a custom scaffolding tool? We really don't want the overhead of maintenance. The existing scaffolding tools, some of them, there's kind of two out there, the Boiler and Bear. Bear seems to be the successor to Boiler. Boiler hasn't been updated in a number of years. It has some private APIs that we would want it to make public so that we could call into it. And it's still, we want to be able to pass it in our logger so that it would log messages out in a nice way. As I said, the other thing about this, the Bear Boiler thing, they download templates as zip files. So this is my half demo. You've had three, this is the half, where I'm just pointing you to lines of code. Downloads templates as zip files from GitHub only. which may be a breaker for some people who don't want to rely on GitHub. Minimal maintenance costs though, which is nice. But Pack would still again have to pull in some prompt UI dependency to say, which of these languages do you want to have template support for? So that's kind of where we are in prototypes. I'm wondering what more people might want to see along different directions so that we can start filling in the gaps in the RFC. But bear in mind that there is always a decision that we could prefer to document this instead of just putting engineering effort into it. I have a preferred solution, but I'm not committed to it. I'm quite happy to take things in the direction that you want to take them. So thoughts, please.
You mentioned taking the dependency on the prompt UI. I mean, if that, I don't know how much that, code that adds, but, have you thought about using flags instead of, interactive prompts?
I have, and certainly we could use flags. And the discussion in the RFC was more around if somebody doesn't put in a flag, could we prompt them then for choosing a language? But
Gotcha.
if we wanted to save the dependency, then certainly we could use a flag. And certainly, we could save that dependency in Pack and just call directly out to something else.
It's also about the experience, right? Like if you have a template that's got like 10, 20 choices and you have to pass all of them as required flags, the user experience ends up becoming like really bad. Like looking at the existing scaffolding tools, almost all of them choose for a prompt-based like scaffold creation user experience.
Okay. I think I was maybe minimizing what the need was there because I just thought it was selecting the template, not necessarily providing values to the template as well. But that makes sense, yeah, because you're going to have to fill in the blanks.
Yeah. So I can just think of a few examples like the Buildpack API. Let's say you want to have a multi-select between which SBOM formats you want to support, who the author is, and like I can also imagine different licenses that you want to include. Like we have something like an internal Buildpack scaffolding tool that currently has 10 options. And like those are roughly changed from Buildpack to Buildpack depending on what the use case is. So,
I mean, can we support both prompt and flags?
Yeah.
Right. Like I can imagine if you had like some scripting thing that you wanted to do, you probably don't want to hit the prompt, but the prompt is probably better than, for a lot of people, especially getting started, of having to know what all those flags are and having to type them out. I think the only way you can get around potential prompt stuff would be like just having defaults, I guess. So at least would generate something, but then you'd probably generate the thing you didn't want, unless that default's like really the vast majority of the cases of what most people would want for that thing, right?
Yeah. So currently what like these other scaffolding tools do is instead of flags for each and every option, they accept a singular flag that contains a file that schema matches the prompts. So you just specify the file to override the defaults if you want to. So let's say you want to override the author each time, like the author email address or like the license. So you just point to the config and that will override the template's values. So that still provides for a non-interactive scaffolding experience. Because like if tried to implement something like this with flags, it's just like dynamic flag handling with, especially with things like choices and Booleans, it just ends up leading to slightly complicated code. It's doable. It's just that there's no, I don't think I've seen something that works nicely with like documentation, like especially when you want to generate like docs for your command line tool that change dynamically based on the template. Like it just ends up being slightly weird.
I guess I'm trying to like figure out what my sort of opinion is, but I guess before I can get into that, I want to hear what the concerns are about dependencies. I definitely hear the concerns about maintenance, right? Like if we were to put all of this into pack, it becomes a burden for pack to sort of maintain. I think we have a similar cost associated to, and I could relate this very much to the term UI, right? Stuff that I think Anthony was working on. That was, you know, again, some additional complexities for a very nice UX that we want. But it, at the end of the day, it does kind of inherit some sort of maintenance cost to it. So I think that's really more or less my concern, as opposed to like dependency size, because from what I would sort of assume, like adding another dependency does not, you know, extremely increase the let's say even the size of the binary that's shipped out, right? So that's not a concern for me, just as an FYI. I think the things that I care about are that the templates themselves be external, right? So that's pretty important to me, because I think we want to maintain those separately. I don't think that we need to or should want to ship out a pack version just to address, let's say, a typo on a template, right? Then it seems like this scaf is that how you pronounce it?
Scaffold, yeah.
Yeah.
Blame
Would,
Samba.
would be a pretty nice intermediate step, right? It's like a very simplified version of what we want, but it's still an external dependency to pack. So it could hopefully, you know, maybe it grows its own legs as far as maintenance goes. But I think I would personally be comfortable with sort of depending on that for the prompt stuff, especially if its goal is to be a very minimal prompt design. Those are all my thoughts. I don't know if that answers, you know, your questions or goals, but those are my opinions.
Cool. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of the fact that Mikey wants to present some stuff as well. I suppose, thank you, Javier, for thoughts. And if anyone else wants to talk to me about it, I'll clean up the RFC. I'll probably take it down the route that Javier is suggesting, and please ping me on Slack if you've got any other thoughts on it. Sorry, Mikey, the floor is yours.
Sure thing. Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to touch in on the .profile build pack, utility build pack, in light of in chatting with Natalie on planning the next lifecycle release that's planned to include the removal of the shell specific logic and the as well as adding in the systems build pack support. And so as part of that, like all those things kind of work together to, you know, get rid of the shell in lifecycle. And that leaves us with a regression unless we get that .profile build pack out at the same time, so that we can still support .profile scripts for users who are exercising those today. You know, we can imagine that a platform operator would add a system build pack to apply the .profile script, and then they can continue to support those while upgrading their lifecycle version and API versions and things like that. So I just want to throw that out there about, so the RFC itself for the .profile build pack is in FCP. I think it should be coming up. I don't know.
I think it's on me to merge it. I was
Okay.
talking with Emily about it earlier this week. Yeah, you can't just click the merge button. You gotta run some stuff locally. So
Right.
The RFC stuff's always a little bit of a pain, I feel like sometimes, but
it's
there's
good.
that, and we're trying to do the issue template to then kind of track the work. So a person coming in could go to the RFC repo, and then if they're interested in this thing, could then see kind of what work needs to be done and where it is. So I need to go ahead and do all that, but I don't know if that's the thing you're asking about, but
I mean, that's part of it, right? The bigger ask, I'm just trying to coordinate all these bits. I'll be driving that from the lifecycle side for the shell removal and the system build pack support. And so just wanted to check in with this group on, coming up with a plan to develop that profile build pack so that we could, hopefully align those or have that ready for when the next lifecycle release ships. Happy to support as I can. Like I said, I'll probably be focusing most of my time on the life cycle and just kind of coordinating all the pieces that need to come together for this. But happy to help support the profile build pack as much as I can, given that I'll be focusing a little bit more on the life cycle side.
So do you have an estimate timeline for like when you're expecting that lifecycle release to go out?
Yeah, and chatting with Natalie, that was one of my questions. She said that they typically have a release about every quarter, so every like 3-4 months, and we just ship 14 or 0.14, and so maybe a few months on that timeline.
I think that should be more than enough time. I think we can definitely get it done way before that.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Is there anything I can do to help support or kick that off, or?
I think we just need to finalize on the implementation, but like everything else, I think the implementation itself, I think, is not that complex. It can be done in a day or two, but
you could just wrap up the bash script and
yeah,
that could be done already. But yeah, no, I hear you. Figuring out the strategy there. Is there Sam, is that something that's interesting you, or you push forward on that, or? Yeah,
I think Daniel wanted to take a lead on that, but
okay.
I have a few opinions, but I'll let Daniel take the lead on that.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to help with that one.
Cool. All right. I think that's all I need from this group for that. Thank you. I didn't catch. I think there's one more agenda item after that. V2 logger.
Yeah, I had put on a ticket for discussion, but we can punt on that. Move on to the last one.
I was going to say, actually, we could talk about that one. The logger discussion is probably larger than the 3 minutes we have left. So if you want to talk about it, go ahead.
No, it's, I mean, I'm going to have to hop off here in 2 minutes. It's probably better, we just maintain or keep going async in the ticket itself. I think, if there was more time, we could talk about it a little bit, but it's not, I think, really that useful to use these last 2 minutes for that. So we'll just keep it going async in the ticket. And just wondering, or we'll get to some conclusion there.
I can tease the logger stuff if you want, Sam. So we're looking at the V2 libcnb and kind of what to implement. Currently we have this concept of a logger. The only thing that we log right now is, 99% of what we log right now is debug level. And there's like two spots where we're logging warning messages at an info level. And in V2, what we're looking at is just 100% debug only, with the warnings becoming errors, just being a little more strict. It seems to fit with the 2 spots where that's happening. And it simplifies the API a lot because you don't have to support multiple logging levels. It's just on or off, extra logging or not. So that almost even simplifies the logging interface to the point where it's not really a logger per se. It's just like formatting and writing some messages. So we have kind of this very basic, the first link there is just a very basic interface and implementation that I put together. And that would be kind of what I would consider like the absolute simplest possible thing we could do. And I guess the question has come up is like, do we want to kind of go that route of more simple, or do we want to go the route of like a more traditional logger? And Sam found that there's a like existing interface that we could piggyback on for that kind of traditional route. It would allow you to plug in like a number of other logging libraries, so you could use kind of the logging library you prefer and all that. So maybe just think about what your needs are, what you'd like to see, and either drop some feedback on those issues or on Slack or something. We can discuss more there, or in 2 weeks too. I don't think there's a rush on this, but we're just trying to understand like what people expect out of logging from libcnb, and what they'd like to see. Did I hit everything, Sam?
Yeah, I think the logger interface also tries to align us with like the logger interface that the Go hotel implementation use, but there were just concerns that the interface is fairly large if you want to implement a trivial logger. So I think we wanted to figure out some compromise where, like, if you want a full-fledged logging experience, however you want, you could use that. But if you just want to implement a simple version of it for libcnb where you just want to print stuff, you could also do that. So like one idea was that libcnb could provide an adapter that adapts from this common logging interface to the more minimal one that we currently use, so that if you want to plug in that Go logger interface into libcnb, you can just use that adapter and use the minimal interface we have, which is just like debug writer and is debug, right? Those are the only two things. Daniel?
Yeah, it's debug, and then we removed the debug writer.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's just debug really. There's like 2 or 3 methods on the interface. It's pretty small.
Yeah, details are in the pull request and the issue link here. We can continue this on Slack. Cool. Thank you all for joining. I love these meetings lately. We get a lot of participation and lots of folks from different areas and vendors. It's nice to get some feedback.